Welcome back to the Classical Pairings Host Challenge brought to you by the National Bank of Indianapolis. I'm Nick Johnson, and this season I'm having people send me their favorite type of music and their favorite local brewery or distillery. I'm coming up with some sort of concoction that matches it all together and thrown in a piece of classical music that you can look up and enjoy. Today we have Katie Ambs of Dragonwood in Tipton County. Let's see what Katie's got for me.
Hi, my name is Katie Ambs, and I work for a small family business based out of Tipton County, so I'm about an hour north of Indy. And we do honey and maple syrup production, so I help do all of that, as well as sales, product production, and photography as well. And some of my favorite types of music to listen to is mainly classic rock, and I really like the Eagles and Elton John. Those are just two of my favorites. And my favorite place to grab drinks in Indy is the Sun King location in Broad Ripple, and my favorite thing to get there is the Wemac Scottish Style Ale. Thanks to Classical Music Indy for having me.
All right, thank you so much, Katie. This challenge, I'm going to admit, this one was a little bit tough for me. First of all, Wemac is my favorite readily available beer in the city. We almost always have Wemac in the house. It is fantastic. They make a lot of fantastic beers at Sun King, but that's one that you can find pretty much anywhere and enjoy. But trying to come up with a pairing with it, to me at least, I was listening to some of the Eagles, some Elton John, and to me it just paired a lot more. Like I would want to do some sort of like a margarita or a tropical drink. So to me, I just wasn't coming up with the pairing. So I went with a different classical group and decided to, in fact, go with sort of a whole Scottish sort of theme for this episode. So the different classical group I'm doing is AC/DC, who is, as you may know, formed in Australia, but the two brothers, Malcolm and Angus Young, are themselves Scottish. So I thought a classic rock group with a very close tie to Scotland because, as you mentioned, Sun King is a Scottish style ale, and so I thought I would work off of that. So for our piece by AC/DC, I decided to go with Hell's Bells from the album Back in Black. I always love the big thumbing church bells at the beginning. It reminds me of a lot of classical music in a way. I mean, clearly they're sort of trying to bring up this sort of medieval time sort of feeling with that sound. And then when the guitars come in, it's really just fantastic. So to pair with that piece, Hell's Bells by AC/DC, I decided to go with a funeral march. I thought that kind of made sense with both the sort of dark crispness of this drink, but then also of the beer, but then also with Hell's Bells. So we're going with Felix Mendelssohn's funeral march. Sometimes it's called the Trauermarsch. So Mendelssohn had actually visited Scotland in 1829. He wrote this piece after he left Scotland. He was in Germany, and one of his friends tragically died very young, a composer as well, Norbert Burgmüller, in 1836, and Felix wrote this piece. It is like any funeral, well, not necessarily like any funeral march, but it's very heavy and dark and foreboding, but it slowly turns into this more sort of comforting, like sort of peaceful and transcendent a little bit at the end. It's a really beautiful piece of music that I think kind of fits well if you like listen to Hell's Bells and then at the end of your journey you listen to this funeral march maybe. So those are the two pieces of music that we're going to go with here. And rather than do a cocktail this week, because what I was working with was a beer, I decided I would have a little bit of fun and I would talk about various types of scotch. That I was going to try to come up with a pairing that would match both pieces of music and somehow sort of capture the spirit of all this. So what I decided to do was kind of come up with a very fancy beer and a shot. If you've been at a bar and ordered a beer and a shot before, which is a thing I have done, you might not get the nicest of drinks. So this is more of a beer and a dram, we'll call it. Something that you can sip on a little bit. So my pairing that I'm going for is which scotch pairs the best with a Scottish style ale from Sun King. So I decided to go with three different scotch from three different regions. If I had a little more time, maybe I would have done all of them, but that would have been maybe a little too much for me to test, but that's okay. So there are, depending on who you ask, 5 or 6 regions in Scotland that produce scotch. You are probably, or you maybe have heard of terms like Highland or Speyside or Islay, or the lowlands, and maybe you're familiar with those, but I decided to try a Highland, a Speyside, and an Islay, because they all, even though they're from a very small country, and many of them are from very, very geographically close to each other, the taste profile is very different. Similar to different bourbons in Kentucky and Indiana. The different Scotch, because of the water source or because of the way they char the malt, are all sorts of different things they do. You get very different flavor profiles. So our goal here is going to be what pairs best with a WEMAC. So let me refresh my memory here. It's just caramel and malt and deliciousness, just a tiny bit of hops. I tend to not like too many hops in a beer, but this one's just enough so you know it's there. But this beer is, to me, extremely drinkable, and I didn't want to do a beer tail. I didn't want to mess with the WEMAC. It's already perfect. It didn't need me, but maybe I could drink something alongside of it and make it even better. So our first Scotch we're going to try this with is a Glenmorangie. This Scotch is a Highland. The Highland Scotches is the sort of largest geographical region and is therefore the most sort of flavor-wise diverse of the Scotches. You tend to get sort of fruit and malt and sweetness out of the Highlands, maybe just a little bit of smoke, but much less than some of the other regions. This is the Glenmorangie 10-year. To me, this tastes like apricot, oak, and almost a little citrus. I'm not exactly sure where that is coming from. And so if I was in this ridiculous pairing of the two, that does actually go down pretty well together. A little bit better than I thought it would. But okay, we're going to keep moving. I don't know which one I'm going to pick. If you watched my one where I did beer out of 3 different glasses because I thought it was funny, then the similar thing here, I don't know which of these is going to be the winner. I am very excited to talk about this one, though. This one is an Ardbeg, which is an Islay. These are the Scotches that you either absolutely love or absolutely hate, because these are the ones that taste like a bog. The island of Islay is a small island with, I believe, around 10 distilleries on it. Lagavulin and Lafroig are probably the best known. And all of the Scotch from there has a lot of peat and smoke and salt, sometimes almost bacon type flavor. When I was pouring these earlier, it filled the room with the smell of smoke just from a little bit of this bottle. By the way, this is the Ardbeg 5-year, which is kind of an unusual one, but it's the one that we had available and is really quite delicious. But I don't know if it's going to pair well. I mean, if you could liquefy a campfire, but like in a really nice way, like that might sound kind of not pleasant to some people, but there's like a small percentage of Scotch drinkers who like this is the pinnacle of liquids. There's just something about this smoke bomb that is just unbelievably good. But paired with a WEMAC, yeah, they don't pair well together. I'll just be totally honest. It turns out the campfire, when you mix it with this, sort of turns into soot. So I would actually not at all recommend. I'm going to allow that to sit. Luckily, it can sit for a while, and I'll enjoy it later. So, okay, Ardbeg, though you are close to my heart, you are going to lose this competition. Next, we have a Speyside. So that means distilleries along the River Spey. It's actually the most condensed area of distilleries in the world. Like there are more distilleries per square kilometer, I guess, than anywhere else in the world. Speysides tend to be very fruit forward, not very much with the peat. They're on the opposite side of Scotland and the Ilays. Lots of vanilla and toffee. This one is the Speyburn single malt 10-year. A very of an affordable bottle, and really, I had not actually had this one until today. And when I sipped it right before we started recording, I said, this tastes like apple pie. It's caramel and apple and just like a tiny, tiny hint of smoke, but it's almost like just a charred crust, kind of like a buttery smoke, not a campfire smoke. And really quite delicious. And I think, yeah, paired with the WEMAC, it brings out some of the fruity notes in this ale. It brings out, earlier I was talking about some of the fruit flavors I get a little bit off of WEMAC, and also the maltiness and the caramelness. And this works really well. It's almost like Thanksgiving dinner where you get a little bit of apple pie and a little bit of cherry pie together. The two of these together is really, really fantastic. So there you go. That is my bizarre pairing of Wee Mac Scottish Style Ale. I'm pairing that with the Speyburn, a Speyside Scotch. And the two of these, you can sip on them together and they're really quite delicious. You can listen to, for our little journey to darkness, if you will, Hell's Bells by AC/DC alongside Felix Mendelssohn's Funeral March. So, Classical Pairings is a listener-sponsored program. If you like what you hear, you can text PAIR, that's P-A-I-R, to 202-858-1233 so we can bring you future episodes pairing classical music with great local craft food and beverage makers. And I would like to thank my challenger, Katie Ambs, and you can learn more about Dragonwood and their various syrups and honeys at dragonwood.online. If you're interested in being a challenger for the next season of our Classical Pairings Host Challenge, you can email info@classicalmusicindy.org for more information. I'd like to thank our production assistant, Chloe Bolter, and our producer, Ezra Baker Trupiano, for their great work. And of course, our friends at the National Bank of Indianapolis. So, I'll see you next time. Cheers!